Guys, welcome back to another video, and in this video we're going to be continuing on with our SwiftUI tutorial series, and in this particular tutorial we are going to be taking a look at observable objects in SwiftUI. Now, what is an observable object? Well, an observable object is a kind of object that allows us to manage many bits of state without having to have numerous at-state variables in our views. Now, observable objects aren't structures. They are classes. So you can pass them around, and they're of course being passed around by reference, and then when all the same kind of stuff that classes have in terms of their benefits, you can utilize within SwiftUI here. And we'll take a look at exactly what I mean by that here in a moment. But to start with, in Xcode, I have a very basic application that just simulates a form for adding a contact. So if we run our code, you can see this is what it looks like. We have a first name, last name, middle initial, phone number, email address, and whether or not the contact is a favorite. Pretty normal fields for a contacts application. But if we go back into Xcode, you can see that we have a whole bunch of state variables that are used for managing all the different state of this screen alone. You can imagine how chaotic it would get if there were several, more than just one view in our application, and we had to manage all of that state individually. That is where observable objects come in. So the first thing that we need when we're talking about an observable object is a model. And so this model is going to be called contact. Down below my content view here, if I go kind of down here, all right. So we can see here, I have a struct called contact, and it conforms to identifiable and all that stuff. And that would be great. This would be great, right? If we were simply just needing to save that somewhere, send it off to a server or something like that. But in this case, we need to convert this to a class and then have it conform to the observable object protocol, which will make it an observable object. But it is important to note that even when we do that, we're not quite done. And I'll explain the last step that we need to make sure that this does in fact work the way we need it to. So first things first, let's replace the word struct with class. So class. Next, before we conform to identifiable, we need to conform to observable object. So before our identifiable conformance, we're going to say observable object, like that. All right. So now, technically, our class is an observable object. So contact will now tell SwiftUI, hey, this is a kind of object you need to observe for changes. However, it doesn't tell SwiftUI which variables it should watch for changes inside of this object, which properties need to be monitored. And that is where the final step comes in, marking the properties that you want to be observed for changes with the @published property wrapper. So the published property wrapper does exactly what I just said. when you mark a property as @published inside of an observable object, that property then gets hooked up to SwiftUI's state management mechanisms behind the scenes, and it will be monitored for changes. So we don't want to monitor the ID property, but everything else we do. We want to monitor first name, middle initial, last name, email, address, all that stuff. So @published 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 and @published, like that. All right, now our contact class is complete. We've marked all of the properties we need to monitor as published. We've added the observable object conformance, and we've changed our contact object from struct to class. Next, we're going to kind of separate the text fields in our form here into their own views. So, for example, the name entry information is going to go into its own view. The contact information is going to go into its own view, and then is favorite, we're going to leave is favorite alone. So let's go ahead and copy these. I'm gonna cut that. And we'll come back to this here in a second here. So above our class here, I'm going to create a struct called name entry view. I'm going to conform to view var body sum view. And we're going to paste that in here. Now, there's one thing that is missing here, and that is how we can actually manage the state for these text fields. Well, that is where the StateObject property wrapper and ObservedObject property wrappers come in. So StateObject is a property wrapper that allows you to manage the state of an observable object and serves kind of as the initial, place, source of truth, if you will, for your state management of a given observable object. And then anything where that state object is passed in that you need to manage state for example, in the name entry view outside of the initial view's lifecycle, you need to use the ObservedObject property wrapper. So let's go ahead and go back up to content view here. And instead of having all of these state variables here, at the top we're going to have a single private variable marked with the @StateObject property wrapper. So @StateObject private var contact, like that. We're going to make it of type contact, and we're going to set it to an initial value of an empty contact object, like that. So it's using the empty initializer for our contact. Now we are going to get yelled at, and that's because we removed all of our state variables, and we can fix that here in a moment. So in our body here, we're going to create our name entry view. So name entry view, and we want to pass it contact. Now our name entry view doesn't have a contact variable yet to use for its initializer, and we can create that by going to our name entry view here. And above our body, we need to create that variable. Now this variable is not going to be marked as private. We have to leave the private keyword out of it. But this variable we're going to use to manage state, because we want to be able to manage the state of our text fields and have that be reflected in our state object in the level up in the view hierarchy. So how do we do that? Well, to use the ObservedObject property wrapper, it's as simple as saying @ObservedObject var contact, like that. Now for each of these text fields where we have the binding, instead of $firstname, we can say $contact.firstname. We can copy that. And instead of $middle initial, $contact.middle initial. And then we can change our onChange here just slightly. So contact dot middle, or contact dot middle initial. Contact dot middle initial. Contact dot middle initial. Contact dot middle initial. Okay. And then finally with our last name here, $contact dot middle initial. Contact dot last name. Blech. Okay. So that is our name entry view. Okay, so we have, okay. Let's make sure that everything works fine here. So we have a problem where okay, I see. Dollar. Okay, there we go. There we go. Now we're good. All right, next we're going to create a view for our contact information. So struct contact info entry view with a view here. Again, we're going to have a observed object. So at observed object var contact, going to be of type contact, and a body some view. Inside of our body, we're going to have a text field with email address and text of $email, or rather $contact.email, and then text field phone number with text of $contact.phone number. Like that. That one's a relatively simple one. All right. Then we're going to get rid of our phone number field here. And then we're also going to get rid of our email field. I'm going to surround my name entry view with a section. And then we'll have another section. And inside of this section, it'll be our contact info entry view. And we'll pass it contact, like that. And then we'll leave the address and is favorite fields alone. We're not going to put them in their own views. We're going to modify their bindings, however. So let's go ahead and do that. And so instead of $address, it'll be contact.address. And then instead of $isFavorite, it'll be $contact.isFavorite. All right, so there we go. Now we have completely switched from having a whole bunch of state variables in our main view here to having a singular state object private property that is going to manage multiple bits of state within its observable object model. We can save this now and run our code. We now have a successful build. Here we can enter a first name, let's say Mike. A middle initial, I'm going to say D. And so I can only enter one character into this field because of the onChange modifier and how I'm making sure that everything else is trimmed away. And then let's say the last name is going to be Rutt, R-U-T-T. And then we can do an email address. So I'm going to say mike.rutt@example.com. .com. Phone number, we'll just say it's just kind of a random number. 000 000 000 0000. Now, of course, I know having all zeros is not a valid phone number, but that's fine. This is just an example to show you that our state management is working. And then we have our we have our address. Let's say 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Now, of course, you might recognize that address, but it's sample data to demonstrate that it's sample data to show that our state management is in fact working. And then we have a checkbox for whether or not the contact is a favorite. And now it's checked, and there we go. Okay, so that pretty much does it for this video on observable objects. Thank you all so very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.